Hello, readers. Welcome back to Reads with Rune B with me, Rune B, and my partner in crime.
Hello, my name is Robert.
And we will be doing another chapter of Oliver Twist for you. We will be doing chapters 5 and 6. So, let's begin. Oliver, being goaded by the taunts of Noah, rouses into action and rather astonishes him. The month's trial over, Oliver was formally apprenticed. It was a nice sickly season, just in time. Its commercial phrase, coffins were looking up. And in the course of a few weeks, Oliver had acquired a great deal of experience. The success of Mr. Sowerberry's ingenious speculation had exceeded even his most sanguine of hopes. The oldest inhabitants recollected no period at which measles had been so prevalent or so fatal to the infant experience, and many were the mournful processions over which little Oliver headed, in a hat band reaching down to his knees, to the indescribable admiration and the emotion of all the mothers in town. As Oliver accompanied his master in most of his adult expeditions, too, in order that he might acquire the equanimity of demeanor and full command of nerve, which are so essential to a finished undertaker, he had many opportunities of observing the beautiful resignation and fortitude with which some strong-minded people bear their trials and losses.
For instance, when Sowerberry had an order for the burial of some rich old lady or gentleman who was surrounded by a great number of nephews and nieces who had been perfectly insoluble during the previous illness, and whose grief had been wholly irrepressible. Even on the most public occasion, they would be happy among themselves, as need be, quite cheerful and content, conversing together with a much freedom and gaiety, if nothing whatsoever had happened to disturb them. Husbands, too, bore the loss of their wives, and the most heroic calmness. Wives again put on weeds for their husbands, as if so far from grieving in the garb of sorrow, they had made up their minds to render it as becoming and attractive as possible. It was observable to the ladies and gentlemen who were in passions of anguish during the ceremony of interment, recovered almost as soon as they reached home and become quite composed before the tea drinking was over. All this was very pleasant and improving to see, and Oliver beheld it with great admiration.
That Oliver Twist was moved to resignation by the example of these good people, I cannot, although I am his biographer, undertake to affirm with any degree of confidence. But I can most distinctly say, for the many months he continued to meekly submit to the domination and ill treatment of Noah Claypole, who used him far worse than before, now that his jealousy was roused by seeing the new boy promoted to the black stick and hat band, while he, the old one, remained stationary in muffin cap and leathers. Charlotte treated him badly because Noah did, and Miss Sowerberry was his decided enemy because Mr. Sowerberry was disposed to be his friend. So, between these three on one side and a glut of funerals on the other, Oliver was not altogether as comfortable as the hungry pig was when he was shut up, by mistake, in the granary department of the brewery.
And now I come to a very important passage in Oliver's history. For I have to record an act, slight of unimportant, perhaps an appearance, but which indirectly produced a most material change in all his future prospects and proceedings.
One day, Oliver and Noah descended into the kitchen at the usual dinner hour to banquet upon a small joint of mutton, 1.5 pounds of the worst end of the neck. When Charlotte, being called out of the way, there ensued a brief interval of time, which Noah Claypole, being hungry and vicious, he considered not possible devote to a worthier purpose than aggravating and tantalizing poor young Oliver Twist. Intent upon this innocent amusement, Noah put his feet upon the tablecloth, and pulled Oliver's hair, and twitched his ears, and expressed his opinion that he was a sneak, and further announced his intention of coming to see him hanged whenever that desirable event should take place. Entered upon various other topics of petty annoyance, like malicious and ill-conditioned charity boy he was. But none of these taunts produced the desired effect of making Oliver cry. Noah attempted to be more facetious still, and in this attempt did what many small wits with far greater reputations than Noah sometimes do to this day when they want to be funny. He got rather personal.
"Workers,"
said Noah.
"how's your mother?"
"She's dead,"
replied Oliver.
Don't you say anything about her to me."
Oliver's colours rose as he said this. He breathed quickly,
Which Mr. Claypole thought must be the immediate precursor to a violent fit of crying. Under this impression did he return to the charge.
"What did she die of, Workers?"
said Noah.
"Of a broken heart. Of some of our nurses told me,"
replied Oliver, more as if he were talking to himself than answering Noah.
"I think if I can get the page
I think
over.
I know what it must be to die of that."
Toly roly lol lol, right o followy lie, Workers.
said Noah, as a tear rolled down Oliver's cheek.
"What set you snivelling now?"
"Not you.
replied Oliver, hastily brushing the tear away.
Don't you think it?"
"Oh, not me, eh?"
sneered Noah.
"No, not you."
Replied Oliver sharply.
That's enough. Don't say anything more to me about her. You better not,"
"Better not?"
exclaimed Noah.
"Well, better not, Workus. Don't be impudent. Your mother, too. She was a nice un, she was. Oh, Lor!" And here Noah nodded his head expressively, and curled up as much of his small red nose as muscular action could collect together for the occasion.
"You know, Workers,"
continued Noah,
Im-
emboldened by Oliver's silence and speaking in a jeering tone of affected pity. Of all the tones, most annoying.
"You know, Workers, it can't be helped how and of your course you couldn't help it then, and I'm very sorry for it, and I'm sure we're all and pity you very much. But you must know, Workers, your mother was a regular right down batten."
"What did you say?"
inquired Oliver, looking very quickly
Up.
Very quick. No, it's just very quickly.
Looking up very quickly.
Oh, looking up very quick. Brain.
"A right regular down baden, Workus.
Replied Noah coolly.
And a great deal better, Workus, that she died when she did, or else she'd have been hard labouring in Birdwell, or transported, or hung, which is more likely than either, isn't it?"
Crimson with fury, Oliver started up, overthrew the chair and table, seized Noah by the throat. Oh, God. Shook him in the violence of his rage till his teeth chattered in his head, and collecting his whole force into the heavy blow, felled him to the ground.
A minute ago the boy had looked a quiet, mild, dejected creature, and the harsh treatment had made him. But his spirit was roused at last. His cruel insult to his dead mother had set his blood on fire. His breast heaved, his attitude was erect, his eyes bright and vivid, his whole person was changed. He stood glaring over the cowardly tormentor, who now lay crouching at his feet, and defied him with an energy he had never known before.
"He'll murder me!"
blabbered Noah.
"Charlotte, Mrs., he's the new boy, a murderer of me! Help! Help! Oliver's gone mad! Charlotte!"
Noah's shouts were responded to by a loud scream from Charlotte, and a louder scream from Miss Sowerberry, the former of whom rushed into the kitchen by a side door, while the latter paused on the stairwell, till she was quite certain that it was consistent with the preservation of humane life to come further down.
"Oh, you little wretch!"
Screamed Charlotte, seizing Oliver with her utmost force, which was about equal to that of a moderately strong man when in good condition. And that is Oliver and Mrs. Sowerberry and Charlotte all in the kitchen. To be honest, Noah had it coming.
Yep. In particularly good training. "Oh, you little ungrateful, murderous, horrid villain!"
Between every syllable, Charlotte gave Oliver a blow with all her might, accompanying it with a scream for the benefit of society. Charlotte's fist was by no means a light one, but lest it should not be effectual in calming Oliver's wrath, Miss Sowerberry plunged into the kitchen and assisted to hold him with one hand while she scratched at his face with the other. In this favourable position of affairs, Noah rose from the ground and pummeled him from behind. This was rather too violent an exercise to last for long. When they were all three wearied out and could tear and beat no longer, they dragged Oliver, struggling and shouting, but nothing daunted, into the dust cellar, and there locked him up. This being done, Miss Sowerberry sunk into the chair and burst into tears.
"Bless her, she's gone off,"
said Charlotte.
"A glass of water, Noah. Dear, make haste."
"Oh, Charlotte!"
Mrs. Sowerberry, speaking as well as she could through deficiency of breath and sufficiency of cold water which Noah had poured over her head and shoulders.
I don't think that's what Charlotte wanted him to do with that, but, you know.
"Oh yeah, glass of water."
"Oh, Charlotte, what a mercy we have not all been murdered in our beds,"
"Ah, mercy indeed, ma'am.
was the reply.
I only hope this will teach master not to have more of these dreadful creatures that are born to be murderers and robbers from their very cradle. Poor Noah was all but killed, ma'am, when I came in,"
"Poor fellow,"
said Mrs. Sowerberry, looking piteously on the charity boy.
Noah, whose top waistcoat button might have been somewhere on a level with the crown of Oliver's head, rubbed his eyes with the inside of his wrist while this commiseration was bestowed upon him, and performed some affecting tears and sniffs.
I have missed my place.
"What's to be done?" exclaimed Miss Sowerberry. "Your master's not at home. There's not a man in the house. He'll kick the door down in 10 minutes.
Oliver vigorously plunges against the bit of timber in question, rendering this occurrence highly probable.
Dear, I don't know, Mum,"
said Charlotte.
"unless we send for the police officers,"
"Or the military."
suggested Mr. Claypole.
No,
said Miss Sowerberry, bethinking herself of Oliver's old friend.
"Run to Mr. Bumble, Noah, and tell him to come here directly, and not to lose a minute. Never mind your cap, make haste. You could hold a knife to that black eye as you run along. It'll keep the swelling down."
And here we must state, running with knives
Bad idea.
is a bad idea, and definitely don't put them to your eye and run.
Never do it.
Again, that's a really bad idea. Don't do it.
Foolish people.
Noah stopped to make no reply, but started off at his fullest speed, and it very much astonished people who were walking out to see the charity boy tearing through the streets pell-mell with no cap on his head and a clasp knife at his eye.
And again, no running with knives.
Yeah,
It
running with knives, bad.
blows my mind that this was how stupid people were back then. Common sense.
Chapter 7. Oliver continues refractory.
Noah Claypole ran along the streets at his swiftest pace and paused not once for breath until he reached the workhouse gate, having rested here for a minute or so to collect the good burst of sobs and interposing showers of tears and terror. He knocked loudly at the wicket and presented such a rueful face to the aged pauper who opened it, and even he who saw nothing but rueful faces about him at the best of times, started back in astonishment.
"Why, what's the matter with the boy?"
said the old pauper.
"Mr. Bumble! Mr. Bumble!"
cried Noah with well-affected dismay, and in a tone so loud and
Agitated that they not only caught the ear of Mr. Bumble himself, who happened to be hard by, but alarmed him so much that he rushed into the yard without his cocked hat, which is a very curious and remarkable circumstance, as showing that even a beetle, acted upon by sudden and powerful impulses, may be afflicted with a momentary visitation of loss of self-possession and forgetfulness of personal dignity.
"Oh, Mr. Bumble, sir,"
said Noah.
"Oliver, sir, Oliver has,"
What?
interposed Mr. Bumble, with a gleam of pleasure in his metallic eye.
Not run away, has he? He hasn't run away, has he, Noah?
"No, sir, no, not run away, but he's turned vicious,"
replied Noah.
"He tried to murder me, and then tried to murder Charlotte and the missus. Oh, what a dreadful pain it is, such agony, please, sir."
And here Noah writhed and twisted in his body into an extensive variety of eel-like positions, thereby giving Mr. Bumble to understand that, from the violent and sanguinary onset of Oliver Twist, he had sustained severe internal injury and damage, from which he was, at that moment, suffering the acutest torture.
When Noah saw that his intelligence had communicated perfectly paralyzed
Mr. Bumble, he imparted additional effect thereunto by bewailing his dreadful wounds 10 times louder than he had before, and when he observed the gentleman in the white waistcoat crossing the yard, he was more tragic in his lamentations than ever, rightly conceiving it highly expedient to attract notice and rouse the indignation of the gentleman aforesaid. The gentleman's notice was very soon attracted, for he had not walked 3 paces when he turned angrily around and inquired what for the young cur was howling, and why Mr. Bumble did not favour him with something which would render a series of vernacular exclamations so designated an involuntary process.
"It's a poor boy from the free school, sir,"
replied Mr. Bumble,
"who has been nearly murdered, but all murdered, sir, by young Twist,"
"By Jove!"
exclaimed the gentleman in the white waistcoat, stopping short.
"I knew it. I felt a strange presentiment for the very first time that young audacious savage would come to be hung."
"He has likewise attempted, sir, to murder the female servant,"
said Mr. Bumble, with a face of ashy paleness.
"And his missus?"
interposed Mr. Claypole.
"And his master too, I think you said, Noah?"
added Mr. Bumble.
"No, he's out. He would have murdered him too,"
replied Noah.
"He said he wanted to."
"Ah, he said he wanted to, did he, my boy?"
inquired the gentleman in the white waistcoat.
"Yes, sir.
replied Noah.
And please, sir, Mrs. wants to know whether Mr. Bumble can spare time to step up there directly and flog him, 'cause the master's out."
"Certainly, my boy, certainly,"
said the gentleman in the white waistcoat, smiling benignly and patting Noah's head, which was about 3 inches higher than his own.
"You're a good boy, a very good boy. Here's a penny for you, Bumble, just step up to the Sowerberrys with your cane and see what the best to be done. Don't spare him, Bumble,"
"I will not, sir,"
replied the beadle, adjusting the wax end which was twisted around the bottom of his cane for purposes of parochial flagellation.
"Tell Sowerberry not to spare him either. They'll never do anything with him without stripes and bruises,"
said the gentleman in the white waistcoat.
"I'll take care of it, sir,"
replied the beadle, and the cocked hat and cane having been by this time adjusted to their owner's satisfaction, Mr. Bumble and Noah Claypole betook themselves with all speed to the undertaker's shop.
And here the position of affairs had not improved at all, as Sowerberry had not yet returned, and Oliver continued to kick with undiminished vigour at the cellar door. The accounts of his ferocity, as related by Mrs. Sowerberry and Charlotte, were of so startling a nature that Mr. Bumble judged it prudent to parley before opening the door. With this view, he gave a kick at the outside, by way of prelude, then applying his mouth to the keyhole, said, in a deep, impressive tone,
"Oliver!"
"Come, you let me out!"
replied Oliver from the inside.
"Do you know this here voice, Oliver?"
said Mr. Bumble.
"Yes."
Replied Oliver.
"Ain't you afraid of it, sir? Ain't you a-trembling while I speak, sir?"
said Mr. Bumble.
"No!"
replied Oliver boldly, an answer so different from the one he had expected to elicit and was in the habit of receiving, staggered Mr. Bumble not a little. He stepped back from the keyhole, drew himself up to his full height, and looked from one another to the three bystanders in mute astonishment.
"Oh, you know, Mr. Bumble, he must be mad,"
said Mrs. Sowerberry.
"No boy in half his senses could venture to speak to you so,"
"It's not madness, ma'am,"
replied Mr. Bumble, after a few moments of deep meditation.
"It's meat,"
"What?"
exclaimed Mrs. Sowerberry.
"Meat, ma'am, meat,"
replied Bumble, with stern emphasis.
"You've overfed him, ma'am. You've raised an artificial soul and spirit in him, ma'am, unbecoming of a person of his condition. As the board, Miss Sowerberry, who are practical philosophers, will tell you. What have paupers to do with soul or spirit? It is quite enough that we let them have live bodies. If you have kept the boy on gruel, ma'am, this never would have happened,"
"Dear, dear,"
ejaculated Mrs. Sowerberry, piteously raising her eyes to the kitchen ceiling.
"this comes of being liberal."
The liberality of Miss Sowerberry to Oliver had consisted in profuse bestowal upon him of all the dirty odds and ends which nobody else would eat. So there was a great deal of meekness and self-devotion in her voluntarily remaining under Mr. Bumble's heavy accusation, of which, to do her justice, she was wholly innocent, in thought, word, or deed.
"Ah,"
said Mr. Bumble, when the lady had brought her eyes down to the earth again.
"the only thing that can be done now, that I know of, is to leave him in the cellar for a day or so, till he's a little starved down, and then take him out and keep him on the gruel, although his apprenticeship, all through his apprenticeship. He comes from a bad family, excitable nature, Mrs. Sowerberry. Both the nurse and the doctor said that his mother made her way here against difficulties and pains that would have killed any well-disposed woman weeks before."
At this point in Mr. Bumble's discourse, Oliver, hearing enough to know that some further allusion was being made to his mother, recommenced kicking with a violence that rendered every other sound inaudible. Sowerberry returned at this juncture, and Oliver's offences having been explained to him with such exaggeration as ladies thought best calculated to rouse his ire, he unlocked the cellar door in a twinkling, and dragged his rebellious apprentice out by the collar. Oliver's clothes had been torn in the beating he had received, and his face was bruised and scratched, and his hair was scattered over his forehead. The angry flush had not disappeared, however, and when he was pulled out of his prison, he scowled boldly on Noah, and looked quite undismayed.
"Now you're a nice young fellow, ain't you?"
said Sowerberry, giving Oliver a shake and a box on the ear.
"He called my mother names,"
replied Oliver.
Well, and what if he did, you little ungrateful wretch?"
said Miss Sowerberry.
She deserved what she deserved what he said, and worse."
"She didn't."
"She did."
"It's a lie."
Mrs. Sowerberry burst into a flood of tears.
This flood of tears left Mr. Sowerberry no alternative. If he had hesitated for one instant to punish Oliver most severely, it must be quite clear to every experienced reader that he would have been, according to all precedences in dispute of matrimonial establishment, a brute, an unnatural husband, an insulting creature, a base imitation of a man, and various other agreeable characteristics too numerous for recital within the limits of this chapter. To do him justice, he was, as far as his power went, and it was not very extensive, kindly disposed towards the boy. Perhaps it was because it was in his interest to be so, or perhaps because his wife disliked him. The floods of tears, however, left him no resource. So at once he gave him a drubbing, which satisfied even Mrs. Sowerberry herself, and rendered Mr. Bumble's subsequent application of the parochial cane rather unnecessary. For the rest of the day he was shut up in the back kitchen, in company with a pump and a slice of bread, and at night Miss Sowerberry, after making various remarks outside the door, by no means complimentary to the memory of his mother, looked into the room, and, amidst the jeers and pointings of Noah and Charlotte, ordered him upstairs to his dismal bed.
It was not until he was left alone in the silence and stillness of the gloomy workshop of the undertaker that Oliver gave way to the feelings which the day's treatment may be supposed likely to have awakened in a mere child. He had listened to their taunts with a look of contempt. He had borne the lashes without a cry. He had felt the pride swelling in his heart, which would have kept down a shriek to the last, though they had roasted him alive. But now, when there were none to see or hear him, he fell upon his knees on the floor, and hid his face in his hands, wept such tears as God sent for the credit of our nature. Few so young may ever have caused to pour out before him.
For a long time Oliver remained motionless in this attitude. The candle was burning low in the socket when he rose to his feet, and having gazed cautiously around him, and listened intently, he gently undid the fastenings of the door and looked abroad. It was a cold, dark night. The stars seemed, to the boy's eyes, farther from the earth than he had ever seen them before. There was no wind, and the sombre shadows thrown by trees upon the ground looked like sepulchral and deathlike from being so still. He softly reclosed the door, and having availed him of the expiring light of the candle to tie up in a handkerchief the few articles of wearing apparel he had, and sat himself down upon the bench to wait for morning.
With the first rays of light that struggled through the crevices in the shutters, Oliver rose and again unbarred the door. One timid look around, one moment's pause of hesitation. He had closed it behind him, and was in the open street.
He looked to the left, and looked to the right, uncertain whither to fly. He remembered to have seen wagons, as they went out, tolling up the hill. He took the same route, and arriving at the footpath across the field, which he knew after some distance led out again into the road, struck on to it, and walked quickly on. Along the same footpath Oliver well remembered he had trotted beside Mr. Bumble when he first carried him to the workhouse from the farm. His way lay directly in front of the cottage. His heart beat quickly when he bethought himself of this, and he half resolved to turn back. He had come a long way, though, and he should lose a great deal of time by doing so. Besides, it was so early that there was little fear of his being seen, so he walked on.
He reached the house. There was no appearance of its inmates stirring. He reached the house where there was no appearance of its inmates stirring. At that early hour, Oliver stopped and peeped into the garden. A child was weeding one of the little beds, and he stopped. He raised his pale face and disclosed the features of one his former companions. Oliver felt glad to see him before he went, for though younger than him, he had been a little friend and playmate. They had been beaten and starved and shut up together many and many times.
"Hush, Dick,"
said Oliver,
as the boy ran up to the gate, and thrust his thin arms through the rails to greet him.
"Is anyone up?"
Nobody but me.
replied the child.
You mustn't say you saw me, Dick.
Said Oliver.
I'm running away. They beat me and ill-used me, Dick. I'm going to seek my fortune some long way off. I don't know where. How pale are you?
I heard the doctor tell them I was dying,
replied the child with a faint smile.
I am very glad to see you, dear, but do not stop, do not stop,
Yes, I will say goodbye to you,
replied Oliver.
See you again, Dick. I know I shall, and you will be well and happy.
I hope so, replied the child. After I am dead, but not before. I know the doctor must be right, Oliver, because I dream so much of heaven and angels, and kind faces that I never see when I am awake. Kiss me, said the child,
climbing low upon the gate and flinging his arms around Oliver's neck.
Goodbye, dear. God bless you.
The blessing was from a young child's lips, but it was the first that Oliver had ever heard invoked upon his head, and through all his strugglings and sufferings and troubles and changes of his life after, he would never once forgot it. And that is the end of our 2 chapters for today. Keep reading, stay awesome. See you next time, readers. Bye.
Bye.